Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about Week 11 IDP recap as well as our Front Office Pro tip of the week for Week 12. With us today is Tom Kislingbury. Tom, thanks so much for joining the show today.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's always lovely to be asked on to talk football. There were years and years ago, I was in the NFL for a long time and you couldn't talk to anybody even if you tried. So every time someone from around the world wants to chat, I jump at it.
Hike!
Absolutely. So, Tom, why don't you start us off? Who do you have as your stud from Week 11?
So I'm going Khalil Mack. Now, not the name I thought I'd be talking about, and Khalil Mack has certainly had some moments this year where I've thought you might be showing age a little bit. I mean, I'm an old man, so right, he's nearly 33. That makes me laughable. But I thought he was spectacular last week. I thought he was consistently getting to the quarterback. Now the Packers line is not brilliant. More on that later. But a couple of sacks, 6 big tackles. I thought he really poked up the points. Not the first big game he's had this year, of course. Which week was it? Back in week 4 when he absolutely tore it up. He ended up with 4 or 5 sacks and broke scoring for a lot of different places. But Khalil Mack is putting together a quietly really, really good season.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had Khalil Mack last year, and I found he was very feast or famine. And I got really annoyed with him, and so I traded him in the offseason because, like, you're just not. I mean, obviously, with anything in IDP, there's inconsistency all over the place. So I just felt like he was even more inconsistent. But it'll be interesting now that Joey Bosa, non-injured reserve, doesn't. Tuli Pelopta. I think if I said that right, but
that was better than I would do.
Really? How would you say it, Joe?
Tupelotu, right?
Oh, the winner. But anyways, maybe he's been looking pretty good this year, but I don't know. We'll not having that bookend rusher on the other side that will affect Matt going forward. But I'm with you. He's had some really, really massive games. In the one game you were referencing, I think he had like 6 sacks or something like that.
Yeah, it was mad. He just went crazy. So here's a good question. I haven't actually thought about it before. Is it a thing where older but very good pass rushers, they've still got the skills, they've still got the moves, they've still got the instincts and all that stuff, but they're clearly not as fast and as strong, as athletic as they used to be. Is it the case that older pass rushers are much better at bullying really bad matchups? So when they find that tackle who just can't handle him, they properly put him in the ground, but fade a little bit against more elite opposition, which would sort of suggest having bigger boom and bust weeks as you get older. But I haven't tested it. I've literally just thought of it, but let's find out.
That's interesting. What do you think of that thought, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept. The weird thing about Khalil Mack is usually you like to see, having like an opposing running mate at edge rusher to be really good, but it almost seems like Khalil Mack does better when Joey Bosa is not on the field. I don't know if it's a motivation factor where he feels like he's got to step up and be that guy, but I think even in that big game, Bosa might have been out or missed some time then.
I mean, to your point, what running mate has Khalil Mack really played with? Joey Bosa's probably been his best, right? In Vegas, he didn't really have anybody. In Chicago, he didn't really have anybody. So who has he really worked with on the defensive line? He's been kind of like the guy.
Yeah, a lot of his career, certainly. What Chicago paid for him and how they built their team. I definitely agree with you there. Yeah, I did a bit of work on this probably a couple of years ago, and I basically went through about 15 years worth of data, and I compared. I ranked every pass rusher in every team. Right, you were the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, based on how effective you were, and then I looked at different tiers of how much that other guy boosted you. Right, so for people that had a better beta when they were the alpha, how much better did that compare across the whole data set against people who had a worse? Blah blah blah. You get the point. It took me ages. It was a pain in the bum, and it wasn't that big. For the top guys, like the impact of a beta pass rusher on an alpha pass rusher is a handful of percent, like it's 4 or 5% better, something like that over the season. So it is a factor. It is true. The whole concept of, they don't have to double team you every time and that sort of stuff, but it's not very big in my experience.
Interesting. So who do you have as your stud from week 11?
The stud I'm going with is going to be Jalen Phillips. He came out guns a-blazing off the bye this week. He had 6 tackles, 2 sacks, and even had an interception in this game for good measure. He played 88.5% of snaps and had a pass rush grade of 68.9.
Yeah, I know he's been injured for a few games this year. I've been really impressed not only by him but even Bradley Chubb. Talk about Chubb who's been completely inconsistent and can't stay on the field himself. You would think that defense is better with the likes of those guys and Christian Wilkins. I don't understand why they just get absolutely shredded. But that's exciting to see. I think it's probably his best game of the year, if I'm not mistaken, for Jalen Phillips.
Yeah, I like Bradley Chubb, your point there as well. I totally agree. He is the most up or down guy. When he's good, he's a really good player, but he goes so long when you just go, you can't be bothered and you're not doing anything. And we talked about sacks and pressures off air, right? He's always been a guy in his better years who had more sacks than he should have compared to the pressure he was delivering. But I agree. He's probably having his best season in the NFL. And when he's hot, he's red hot.
Yeah, I think to your point, Steve, I mean, the reason their defense isn't better, it's just been the secondary. I mean, Xavier Howard was out, Jalen Ramsey was out. Then, Kader Kohu is their nickel guy. He was forced to play on the outside. So a lot of it was secondary stuff. And, Jalen Phillips was even injured to start the season as well. So Bradley Chubb was really on his own. But I think, with Vic Fangio coming over, they're picking up his system. I think they could get better as the season progresses here.
Here's my stat on Dolphins corners. And every team thinks their players have been injured more than everybody else. I had literally had this argument at the pub with a Dolphins fan the other day. Dolphins have used 9 different corners so far on defense this year. Second highest in the league. The only team with more than that is the Titans. Sorry, not the Titans, the Eagles, who've had 10. Wow. So I normally say that consistency at corner is one of the great underrated things in a defense. Sure, consistency everywhere is good. There's normally 1 or 2 teams that stay stupidly healthy and they're really good. But if you want consistency anywhere, it's corner. The teams that have lots of chopping and changing and injuries at corner normally aren't very good. Dolphins defense, I think I've got 12th to 16th, something like that at the moment. And I would probably argue that all the chopping and changing in corner has been a massive part of that.
That makes a lot of sense. I was always scratching my head why the Philadelphia Eagles had secondary was so bad when you got Darius Slay and James Bradbury. But then when you say they've had 10 corners, I guess that makes a little bit more sense why their secondary is being so brutal.
And some of those guys are, a handful of snaps here and there, right? So it's a blunt force instrument. But definitely, once you get to week 11 or whatever we're on at the moment, just sheer number of corners. So average about 6.5, something like that for the NFL. Who's lowest at the moment? The Chiefs. Chiefs have only used 4 corners. And again, it depends how you define a corner versus a safety in the slot, right? Because I think you've got slot safeties and slot corners, and it depends what they're doing when they're not. And blah, blah, blah. We could talk about that all day long. But the point is, the Chiefs are one of the elite defense in the NFL, and they've been really, really consistent at arguably the most important position on defense. Miami have been porous and had real problems, and they've had injuries there, same as the Eagles that you pointed about. So I'm cherry picking, but those are true, I think.
Interesting. So my stud from week 11 is safety Jair Brown. The starting safety Talanoa Hufanga was injured in this game, and now it appears he tore his ACL, so he's going to be out for the season. Jair Brown only put a total of 36 snaps that game, but I was really impressed. He actually finished with the top 10 safety defensive grade according to PFF. That was 76.8. He ended up with 2 solo tackles, 2 assisted tackles, 3 pass deflections, and an interception. He was my top safety coming out of the draft class this season. Absolute ball hawk. You got to see him be able to, he was an alpha deflection, but he had to reverse course and be able to get that pick to seal the game for the 49ers. But this is a guy who really has been redshirted. And that's the thing you got to be mindful of when it comes to IDP. There are instances where these rookies just do not play. They do not play at all. And then the second year they come in, then they play really well. I thought that was going to be Jair Brown because he just was buried behind the depth chart. And now that this has happened, I like him even more going forward. So I think he had a statement game in his first game as a rookie. And as an owner of his, I'm very excited for the future.
Yeah, I'm excited about him as a player too. I really like him. I really like that Niners safety system as well. They play a lot of cover 2, a lot of split field stuff. So arguably easier to adapt to that as a rookie, depending compared to some of the other schemes in the NFL, which are, say, the Vikes are putting safeties right up on the edge quite a lot, rotate them in the box, moving them side to side. Very different to what they've done the last couple of years. So good news. Hopefully Brown can kick on and look that good.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not only did clinched, the win for the 49ers, Dave. It also clinched our matchup in fantasy, unfortunately for you, against me. But yeah, I think obviously you mentioned Hufanga being out for the season. I mean, that opens up the whole just what Brown needed for opportunities to be on the field.
Well, I can't even remember when Hufanga was drafted. I want to say he was a late round pick that ended up turning into something. But J.R. Brown's a third round pick, so I think it's one of those things where he could. And the other thing is Tayshaun Gibson is the other safety who's been primarily playing. I thought for sure that once Gibson was gone, I think he's like 33 years old. Once he's gone, J.R. Brown would step up, and then you had Hufanga. But now Hufanga's out, so he has to step in. So I'm really liking his future.
Yeah, Hufanga's an interesting guy. I've just looked up, and this is the third season, which feels like it's gone really quick. So I do think safeties get a boost in how good the general public think they are based on. So three things in my mind. One, being drafted early. Everyone loves first round safeties, right? You just remember them forever. Two, having a cool name. A lot of these names are pretty cool, but everyone remembers Racy McWhizerface, and nobody remembers Sidney Thomas. And third, having long hair. So as a safety, having long hair is a massive thing, and it goes way back beyond Polamalu. But us and certainly casual football fans, when you're watching a game, you see the guy with long hair making a play in a way that you don't, who's just a generic guy on the back end with a helmet. So he's got 2 out of the 3, and that's really helped Hufanga.
That's it. I didn't think about that. That is very interesting. So, Joe, you gonna say something?
No, I was just gonna say he's definitely not wrong. You do, remember those guys with the long flow hanging out their helmet, and then you see them screaming across the field, make a play. I mean, it definitely sticks with you for sure.
Right, Chase Winovich, we should name after him. Yeah, okay, he had his moments, but pretty much he's made his career on being the guy with the long hair that comes off the edge and makes a big play every so often.
So are you enjoying this video so far? Well, if you are, show your support to our new channel by hitting the subscribe button and liking this video. We'll be creating videos all NFL season long, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. So going over to our duds from week 11, Tom, who was your dud?
I feel really guilty. I've done this, and I hate being mean when you tell me to be mean. I'd rather be mean when I don't have to. I've gone for Aziz Al-Shaair. So actually really good season so far. He got his chance in San Francisco a couple of years ago to play when everybody else was hurt. He did an okay job. I argue he played a lot, piled up a lot of stats, but didn't play very well. But he's gone to Tennessee to be the guy, and actually he's had a pretty solid season. One of his better seasons in the NFL, I'd say. But last week he was pretty bad. He only played 50 snaps. I think he picked up a little knock as well. Had a couple of bad missed tackles. Didn't grade well. Wasn't around the ball. Wasn't looking very aggressive. Wasn't looking like an athlete. I think that was the downside of what you can see a player like Al-Shaair doing, who, in my mind, if he played in 1997, he would have been your starting Sam, and who played 100% of the snaps, and that would have been fine. I'm not sure he's really got a role in the modern NFL. They jammed him in there, and he's done quite well with it, but he's not really a modern linebacker.
That's really interesting, because I know that's the guy that, Joe, you and I talked about a lot during the offseason. We were targeting him as a guy, in your drafts or just, for us and for agency if he's available, because he was going to get that starting linebacker role, coming from San Francisco. He showed flashes in that system. So I was really optimistic, and I agree. He has done really well. So to hear that, it makes you think. I think he signed a prove-it deal, 1-year deal, I think I want to say, in the offseason. So, with when you report stuff like that, Tom, it's like, is he in line to sign for a longer-term extension? I mean, Rand Carthan did come from the Niners. Could possibly be that he wants to keep him, or is it, he's so inefficient or he's so spotty that they're going to move off from him. So you got to be careful with these linebackers, because honestly, every given year, it could completely change on its head. I mean, look at Shaquille Leonard, right? I mean, we just saw him get released by the Colts. I thought for sure he was going to be a post-June 1 cut in the offseason. I didn't think he'd get cut now. So you just never know. Linebacker can be a dangerous game.
I totally agree with that. So who was I talking about the other day? Devin White. So normally in off-season ADP in the dynasty world, right, you get one linebacker who's taken well ahead of everybody else. And it's normally the year before they had a load of sacks or big plays or whatever. So 3 or 4 years ago, Devin White, remember he had 9 sacks in a year, maybe 10 sacks, something like that. And everyone thought, he's that guy. He can get 9 sacks every year. And obviously he's not that guy. Lots of chat about him, whether he's a good player or whether he's not, whether he's a good blitzer, blah, 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 blah. But he's He is amongst the least efficient tacklers at linebacker in the NFL this season, and his blitzing has dried up a bit. You just talked about Shaquille Leonard, who was that guy who was drafted way ahead of everybody else a couple of years ago. And now we're like, oh, yeah, I don't know what we're thinking. We didn't believe that. And, I always believed in whoever else you're going to name, Roquan Smith or something like that. And it's not like when you're that number one linebacker, you're suddenly your career is going to fall apart and it's a death knell. It's not that at all. But they've just got all of the full-time starting linebackers in the NFL have roughly the same amount of chance of doing really well. And there's about 30 of them, right? So the guy that finished first last year could finish anywhere in that top 30 and it wouldn't be surprising at all. So quite often we have the guy who looked like the stud last year who's suddenly not even an LB2. Which to me says the strategy should be don't overinvest in linebackers, right? You want to get full-time linebackers. You just talked about Al-Shaair, which is definitely a good draft because he was being drafted as the 25th linebacker or something like that, and he was definitely in that top 30. Brilliant, lovely target. Think that's great. Just don't go for the top handful of guys. It's the chances of it paying off are low. It does pay off sometimes, but mostly you're going to be wrong. So don't do it.
Oh boy! See, this is very concerning what you're saying to me, Tom. I have Devin White on my dynasty league, and I signed him to like a long-term contract with a hefty amount of money, and now I'm starting to think, what did I get myself into?
Nope, I've changed my mind. That's a great decision. He's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I knew that was played in your head, Steve, as soon as he started talking about Devin White and in not a so good fashion. I saw you getting nervous there,
right? I mean, let's fast forward to next year. Is Devin White going to be a full-time linebacker wherever he ends up, who's probably playing every snap? Yeah, he probably is. So I like that. I think a lot of people love him enough, and he certainly makes the big splash plays, right? And we talked about this in the era of PFF grading and advanced stuff and people having film at home. The raging debate about whether Devin White is good at football or not is still a thing, because we see him blitz and we see him make the plays and we see him make the flashy tackles, and you don't see him let his guy go 5 yards ahead of him on a crossing route because he just can't stay with him and makes bad decisions. But it doesn't matter because NFL GMs appear to make decisions in the same way, right? And I'm not having the hubris to say I'm right in my bedroom in England and they're all wrong. These guys that worked in the NFL for decades. So I'm not that stupid. There's just a debate, right? Some people think A, some people think B, and we don't know. But there's enough body of evidence around people like Devin White to be pretty sure that he'll have that job for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he's supposed to be a free agent next year.
Yeah.
And the Bucs, he wanted a huge extension. I think he held out to a certain degree. Bucs weren't willing to give it to him. So, will the Bucs tag him? Will the Bucs give him the deal? I don't think they're going to give him the deal he wants. So I think he becomes a free agent. If he does become a free agent, that's a very significant free agent at the linebacker position. I can't even remember, as far as like caliber of guy from a linebacker standpoint, who's made it to the market like that. I can't even remember. Usually you don't see those type of guys. I mean, I guess you say Foye Oluokun, but he was kind of like I feel like it was almost kind of an anomaly what he was doing. And, he was a later round pick, whereas, Devin White was a top 5, top 10 pick, if I remember correctly. So I don't know, that'll be interesting.
The Raiders are going to give him $100 million.
They probably will, and he won't do anything, and then I'll be stuck with him.
That would be such a Raiders franchise move.
So you would. Sorry, Raiders fans.
Joe, any other thoughts as far as Azeez Al-Shaair? I know we talked a lot about Devin White. I mentioned Shaq Leonard. What are you thinking over there?
Yeah, obviously you mentioned it, Steve. I mean, off season we were buzzing about the guy, liked his opportunity in Tennessee. Always thought, he just was hidden in the wealth of linebackers that the 49ers had. So getting him out of there and getting him to be the guy was going to be good things.
So, Joe, who do you have as your dud from Week 11?
Yeah, I'm going to stick with the linebacker position and go with Jordan Brooks. He played his highest snap percentage of the year with 99% of snaps, but this is now back-to-back weeks for lackluster performances for him. I mean, he had 2 solo tackles, assisted on 3 others, but, this is a guy that we've come to expect those double-digit tackle games, and that's what he was doing earlier in the year. But now 2 weeks in a row, you guys thinking this is like a sign to come for, Jordan Brooks at this point, or will he get back to his double-digit tackle games?
Well, me, Joe. I had him as my dud last week, so I'm kind of hitting the panic button. I mean, he's a free agent as well in the offseason, so it'll be really interesting what happens to him. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I'm sounds like I'm pretty close to you. I've never really been a fan of Jordan Brooks as a player. Certainly in his first full season, he played a huge amount and he racked up tackles. Everyone quite liked that. But even then, I think he was the most targeted player in the NFL. He was certainly the most targeted linebacker by an order of magnitude. So it was one of those cases where offensive coordinators and quarterbacks were deliberately going after him. And after that, the Seahawks stopped playing him as an every down linebacker, and they brought Bobby Wagner back. And it seems like the writing is on the wall, and he's high profile enough that he might find another job somewhere. Good luck to him. I hope he has a brilliant career and does really well. But if I'm looking at him as an IDP guy, I'm going, yeah, that's a sell opportunity all day long, because he's got the reputation, and I don't massively believe in his long-term potential.
I think we got all consensus on that one. So my dud from week 11 is going to be defensive end Greg Rousseau. He had a PFF grade of 54.4. The problem with any Bills defensive lineman is they've got that rotation. Sean McDermott likes to rotate the defensive lineman. So he only played a total of 30 snaps. So he's got to be really effective within those snaps. He had 2 solo tackles and 2 hurries on a day where the Bills just beat up on the Jets. We know Rousseau has come out and said recently that he is playing with a foot injury. I think it's really hampering him right now. I do like his potential, but I think as a result, because of that injury, I just don't really know what to expect going forward this year. Not to say he won't get a sack or he's not going to have any pressures or anything like that, but this is his 3rd year. Some were expecting someone to break out. I thought he was going to be really good. He's got the talent, but I think you're going to have to wait a little longer for him.
Yeah, you said it about Bills linemen, and this has been a problem for years, basically since the current coaching regime. They just like rotating 4 or 5 guys at the inside and the outside position. So we talked off air about best ball. I think best ball and IDP is specifically made up for this, right? So Greg Rousseau is a good player. Von Miller is a good player. They are all good players. It's just betting on, is this guy going to get a sack or not this week, is a bad bet for most players in the NFL, definitely for them. So I've just looked this up, right? So we've got 11 games in the bank for the Bills. And in that time, they normally play 4 or 5 edge players. So there have been a total of 58 weeks of a Bills player playing in a week, if that makes sense. Some are lower snaps, some are higher. Out of those 58, how many times has the Bills player hit 40 snaps in a week this year?
It's a trick question. I'm gonna go 0. What do you think, Joe?
I don't. Maybe
higher. Take higher than 0.
Higher than 0.
So the answer is 7.
7,
which I think is low, right? So 40 snaps is not a lot. The average NFL game is 66.5 snaps. So to be even a 3/4 player, you're looking at 45. So not even to get 40, 51 out of 58 snaps is tiny. Leonard Floyd's done it 4 times. 2 of those weeks were in weeks 6 when they played like 80 snaps or whatever. It's just you can't trust a guy to even get to 2/3, 3/4 of the snaps. So it's not going to work most weeks.
Yeah, that is difficult. Go ahead, Joe. You say something?
Yeah, well, it's just unfortunate, man. Obviously I was betting on Rousseau to get a sack last week, and with the prediction, facing the Jets, bad offensive line, couple that with Zach Wilson as their quarterback. But Leonard Floyd was able to do it. Just I guess Rousseau couldn't get it done with his limited snaps.
So going over to week 12, we have our IDP Pro tip of the week. So Tom, what is your prediction for week 12?
So I'm going to take what feels like an easy one here, but I'm going to dress it up with a little bit of snazzy. I'm taking Aiden Hutchinson. So I think Aiden Hutchinson is having a phenomenal year. Way better than he was last year when everyone was. Do you remember there was that stat floating around at the end of the season? He was like, he's the only defensive end that's ever had 2 interceptions and 7 sacks, and it's like, whatever. She's made up these numbers. The interceptions, the snaps that fell to him. Whatever. He's playing much better this season. He's one of the best pass rushers in the league. Okay, sure, he's not Myles Garrett and that proper elite, but he's still probably a top 12 edge rusher in the NFL. The problem is he's not been having the sacks. So he's had 58 pressures, only 5 sacks. So way less than average, way less than the guys around him. The reason I think that's going to change is, one, I'll just bet on those numbers to revert. That's not something that's steady. So I'll always bet on the guy that's been a bit lower to regress to the mean, especially when you're playing that much. He's playing a huge amount as well. After Max Crosby and maybe Daniel Hunter, he's one of the highest engine edges in the NFL, and there's not a lot of other good edges on the line, so he's going to play a lot. And secondly, they're playing the Packers. And the Packers' offensive line are one of the 3 worst offensive lines in giving up pressure. So the way I cut it, the Packers, the Vikes, and the Falcons are giving up the most pressure by a mile. They're out ahead of everybody else. Not necessarily the most sacks, because sacks is a quarterback stat, and some quarterbacks just take a lot of sacks. Sam Howell, we're looking right here at you. But in terms of, we've got a matchup where you've got one nearly elite edge rusher who's playing a huge amount and is probably due a little bit of luck, going up against a very porous offensive line in, frankly, a matchup which should be fun because they don't like each other. And I suspect the Packers are a little bit embarrassed about the Lions of all teams coming to take their division title away as they see it. So it should be a cracker.
Yeah, so are we expecting Aiden Hutchinson to eat turkey leg? Is he going to get the turkey leg on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I hope so. That would be awesome. Barry Sanders moment for him right there and then.
That's right.
And maybe went kick the ball into the crowd. Did you see that last week? That was
that was interesting.
What if he kicks the turkey into the crowd this week?
Immediate $1 million penny.
So, Joe, who is your IDP Pro tip of the week for Week 12?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Dietrich Wise. He's got to take advantage of a good matchup against the Giants O-line, and the fact that facing Tommy DeVito, a guy who took 5 sacks in the first quarter last week. So I'm going to say Dietrich Wise goes ahead and gets a sack against the Giants.
Now, Joe, why him versus other New England Patriots pass rushers? I mean, they've got Anthony James, they got Keon White, they've got I'm trying to think who else. Maybe not a lot of others. Why Wise?
Well, Anthony Jennings. I mean, he doesn't have a sack yet, so I didn't know if I wanted to go that bold and say he gets his first sack, but I guess you could have said that. Dietrich Wise was also able to get a sack against Zach Howell, so just kind of following that same logic and thinking that he gets it done against DeVito here.
What about your former Michigan man and Josh Uche?
Yeah, I just feel like it's tough. I feel like he gets rotated in and out a lot, so he's not on the field as often. I mean, obviously, if Judon was there, I mean, he'd be an easy call, but he's not. I just felt going with Dietrich Wise. So
my IDP Pro tip of the week for Week 12 is to go ahead and start cornerback Deron Bland. Bland leads the league with the most amount of interceptions this season with 6, and it just so happens that Sam Howell is tied with throwing the most interceptions in the league with 12. Now, depending on your league, you may not have to start a cornerback. Obviously, if you are, you're definitely playing him regardless. But I would encourage you that if you're playing in a non-cornerback dependent league, whether it's just a DB league or what have you, or just a flex, I'm starting Deron Bland. I'm taking the gamble. And I think on Thanksgiving, he's going to get you an interception. He may even bring it to the house. He likes to do that. So that's my prediction for Week 12.
Feels like there should be more jokes about Deron Bland not being bland. I'm not sure if that translates in North American idioms.
No, it does, yeah.
It does. We were just talking about Bland and how he could. It is interesting though. You would think.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out. That's my fault for missing it.
Oh no, you're good.
No, this was prior to the show. Steve was worried that his call out in the pro tip of the week was going to be too bland for picking Bland.
Well, it's just interesting because Trayvon Diggs, right? He was going to be the guy. He's out for the year, and you got Stephon Gilmore. Those are the two, but now it's been Bland. It's just kind of crazy. You wouldn't have thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, I thought Noah Igbenogany was going to suddenly turn into a decent player from.
Did you really?
No, of course not. He's absolutely horrible. Terrible pick. He's never been good.
Okay, I was going to say, I'm like, that's a hot take.
No, he was. Look, we all laughed when that pick came in, right? Yeah, we can't predict the draft. We're absolutely terrible about it. But that was one of those picks where you go, oh, what have you done there? That's clearly not going to work out. And then he was worse than I expected. So, poor bloke. I am a little bit surprised by Narshawn Wright. I thought he would get a bit more of a shake of the stick, and clearly hasn't been good enough, and none of the Cowboys have ever believed in him. But I thought he had a bit more chance. Turns out I was wrong.
So, Tom, thanks so much for joining the show today. Where can others find your great work?
Oh, thanks for inviting me on. It's been a blast. You can just basically find me on Twitter when I'm on there talking about football. If you want to read long ramblings about IDP, then catch me on DLF. And I normally put something out every week, which reminds me I've got a deadline today, so I need to do that. And if you're in the UK, then you should buy the magazine Gridiron, which is the best NFL magazine in the UK, and you can normally find me in there.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, Tom. We'll be back next week with another IDP guest to go through Week 12 IDP recap and our Week 13 prediction. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.